Welcome back to another week and another episode of the Backroads Bill podcast. I'm Ben, and joined as always by Mr. Backroads Bill. Bill, how are you today?
I'm good enough, Ben. That means I'm really good.
Well, last week we talked about Bill Barilko and how his story inspired the song 50 Mission Cap by the Tragically Hip. And this week we will be delving into another historical event that inspired a famous Canadian artist, Gordon Lightfoot. And this is the story of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Well, The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald was a song that was written by Gordon Lightfoot in 1976. And not just is it a great song, I would say probably my favorite song. I'm not a huge Gordon Lightfoot fan, but probably my personal favorite. But it does a great job of encapsulating what it was like to be on that ship at the time before it sunk. So, Bill, let's start from the very beginning. What was the Edmund Fitzgerald, and how did it make its mark on history?
Yeah, that song from the Oriole, Gordon Lightfoot, and captures it well. The Edmund Fitzgerald was a Great Lakes freighter. It was launched in 1957 and plied the waters of the Great Lakes, carrying iron ore primarily to different places from the mines to the mills. And tragically, in 1976, November 9th in 1975, it went down after its unloading its cargo and encountered one of those vicious November storms in the Great Lakes. So it's a story of loss of life, and of course it's Canadiana, and again Gordon Lightfoot really captures it.
And it was designed originally to bring basically like steel and that kind of stuff from one side of the Great Lakes to the other side of the Great Lakes, right? Yeah,
iron ore pellets primarily to the mills from the mines of Minnesota to the mills, for instance, in Cleveland.
So why did it sink? Like, what was the reason? Was it just too much on there? Was it the storm? Like, what happened to cause it to sink?
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of different theories about that, and of course there were inquests after the fact. I actually talked to an engineer who was on the Great Lakes for many years. He says his take on it was that the steel was fatigued, and every time they put iron ore pellets in the hold, it would create this conical effect like this, and so over time there were points of weakness all along the hull of the boat, and that's why when they found it at the bottom, it was in two pieces. Other theories are that the hatch covers, it got flooded and it kind of went jackknifed and broke in two pieces on the way down. So a lot of theories about that, about what really happened, but it almost made Whitefish Bay, and it's sunk in 160 meters of water, 530 feet, and it was just a little bit. If they would have went a little further along, they might have made it. A third theory was it scraped the bottom of a reef, so to speak, and that was also the precursor to it splitting in two eventually.
Going back to that one theory that you were talking about where it was, wear and tear and stuff like that, in 1975, now I think the ship was made in the 50s?
1957.
1950, yep. August 7th, 1957. Kind of interesting that at that time there wasn't, I guess, as much safety or checks or anything like that was happening to kind of really focus on the wear and tear, or maybe it was just something they couldn't see properly.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, ships are built and like everything else to last, and then over time wear and tear, and of course for sure there would have been fatigued in the hull of the boat, and whether it was checked or not, that's what was its demise eventually.
What was it like for you? Because you were around at that time. Was there a lot of media coverage? Was this a huge story that kind of happened at the time?
Well, you go back to November of 1975. Yeah, it was in the news. Obviously, tremendous loss of life. It was on the lead story, and of course it was the foremost. Would anyone be found? And no one was ever found. An interesting part for me was a few years later in the 1980s that I was at Nays Provincial Park, which is past Marathon Way, is that I was at the park, and a life ring from the Edmund Fitzgerald was found there by the park superintendent. Now, the whole thing doesn't make sense because the Edmund Fitzgerald sank almost in Sault Ste. Marie. So the currents took this life ring all the way to the west, several hundred kilometers, and was found. It was eventually made its way, I think, to the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum outside of Sault, Michigan. And so, anyway, that's just an interesting sidebar of that, of course. And Gordon, there's been 3, I think, dives. Salvage dives, and that's where they retrieved the bell of the Edmund Fitzgerald, which is on display at the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum, Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan side.
Yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit later. But first, let's just go quickly back to the to kind of what happened, because there was obviously a huge storm. I know this mostly from the song because you hear about this a lot. But so it was Captain Ernest McSorley, I believe is how you pronounce it. Was the captain of the ship at the time, and very interesting. He tried to actually go around to make this voyage work.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, there's ship's logs, and there was communication with other Great Lakes freighters at the time, and so it was. And again, they were trying to make their way to Whitefish Bay before to get into sheltered water, so to speak. But the gales of November, as the song says, came calling, and you can just imagine the force of that particular gale at that particular time.
And is there anything in history that's come even close to this? Because you have to think the Great Lakes, right? This just shows how dangerous that they can be, even though it's a lake. It's not the ocean. It's still a lake, but it just shows like how powerful these gusts of wind, especially if you go to like Lake Ontario, right? Like people in Toronto know this, and in that area, very surprising that. I'm sure this has probably happened before, right?
Well, I think from a Canadian perspective and all our perspectives, we know the Titanic hitting the iceberg, and for us, it's the Edmund Fitzgerald, and that's only because really of the song. Gordon
Lightfoot, obviously, we talked about a song. That was a really quick turnaround when you consider that he released the song the next year in 1976.
Yeah, you would think, I don't know the story about that, why he wrote that song, but obviously it was foremost in his mind, like he is a songwriter and a folk singer, and so there you have it. And it's one of those songs that we all we know it.
Yeah, and he's obviously coming. I'm going to butcher this. He's an East Coast person. Right, I don't know a lot about Gordon Lightfoot, but obviously with his accent and everything, very, very East Coast. I think it really speaks to the impact that the Edmund Fitzgerald had at the time, for the fact that, he's kind of at maybe not the height of his career, but he's a very prolific songwriter at the time. And it just shows how much of an impact this had, that he was like, hey, I need to write a song about this. This is a perfect, folk song. Yeah.
Well, actually, he was born in Orillia, but on Lake Couchiching, and so he is akin to water. But yeah, no, it is one of his. I think feature songs that we all can hum along with.
That's super fascinating that he's born in Orillia.
That's why we call him the Orillia Oriole, right on chord.
You learn something new, because when you listen to him talk, he has a very, very heavy accent. Look at that. You learn something new every day.
That's why you're with Backroads Bay.
Exactly. Look at that. Wow. I didn't do a lot of research going into Gordon Lightfoot prior to this. Let's talk about kind of where it is today. You touched a little bit about, there's kind of the American side, there's the Canadian side. So on the American side, there's actually this museum that has come up. Let's talk a little bit about the museum that's on the American side of Sault Ste. Marie.
Yeah, it's north of Newbury, Michigan, and across the border from Sault, Michigan, and about less than an hour away in Whitefish Point. They recovered the bell on one of the 3 salvage dives. It's again, that's what it called the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum, and a lot of other memorabilia from the Edmund Fitzgerald and a lot of other shipwrecks. Because shipwrecks on the Great Lakes, I mean, again, it's the weather and the rocks and the shoreline and those kinds of things. So that's one location where you can get a feeling for the Edmund Fitzgerald. The other one is on the Canadian side, north of Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, and it's at Pancake Bay, and there's this trail called the Lookout Trail, worthwhile scenes, particularly in the fall when the fall colors change, in that you go up there on the trail, you come up to a vista, and you're actually looking out at the entrance of Whitefish Bay, and you could actually envision where the Edmund Fitzgerald may have went down. But there's a whole display of interpretive signs based on the Edmund Fitzgerald, and it's actually a steel grate kind of vista to the top. So it's a great place to kind of think about where and understanding that you weren't that far away and what happened. And again, as time goes on, we're thinking about November 9th in 1975. So years go by. But again, I think it's one of those things, as you asked me earlier, whether it's the Titanic or it's the Edmund Fitzgerald, when we think of things like that, catastrophes like the Edmund Fitzgerald, kind of reminds me of the Bill Barocco song too, 50 Mission Cap, and that how songs stay in our minds based on some historical event.
Yeah, and you've talked about Whitefish Point a couple of times. It's also home, and I'm taking this rate. So everybody knows I'm taking this rate from Bill's notes. So this isn't my handiwork. It's the home to the oldest operating lighthouse on Lake Superior, which has been in operation since 1861, which is the same year that Abraham Lincoln took office.
Yeah, there you go. A lot of little, sometimes historical trivia kind of piques our interest, so to speak, but lighthouses are everywhere on the Great Lakes and all over the place, and that was the first form of navigation.
So if you're ever on Jeopardy or any sort of trivia night at a local pub and you get that question, you can thank Bill here for giving you the answer.
Yeah, you can sound very, very smart.
Now, there's also a guy from the Great Lakes Shipwreck Historical Society, or GLHS for short, Corey Atkins, who he talked about how the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum is one of Michigan's most popular tourism destinations, attracting over 75,000 visitors every single year.
Yeah, that's because of the Edmund Fitzgerald, for sure. No question about that. And I asked him that question about popularity, and it's because of the song. Yeah,
and he was, again, there's that mystery as to why there's no reasons. It's never explained. And he was saying it remains the most mysterious and controversial of all shipwreck tales heard around the Great Lakes. And that just, again, shows you the potency of the Great Lakes as a danger, when the fact they have a whole museum that's dedicated towards grabbing the shipwreck, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we talked a little bit on the Canadian side of the trails. You mentioned Pancake... sorry, I just had it out here. Pancake Falls or Tower Lake. So there's a couple of trails. So let's take a little walk through there.
Yeah, no, I mean... Pancake Bay Provincial Park is I think one of those destination parks on Lake Superior coastline. In the Lookout Trail, again, you have that opportunity to go to the vista, and you have some other sidebar trails to the falls and walking through the forest. So it's a worthwhile. I think it's a worthwhile venue if you're looking for that trail experience. And again, Pancake Bay and Batchewana Bay, which is a day-use park just down the road on Highway 17. Those are worthwhile places to look for in your travels.
And is there any connection at all with the Edmund Fitzgerald? Any sort of, like, you can go and see, we talked about on the American side, any museums or anything like that on the Canadian side that really kind of commemorate, or memorials or anything like that?
I think the closest you have is that Lookout Trail at Pancake Bay Provincial Park, and it's kind of different. It's different than a museum, obviously, but that's a place to go to and think about what really happened.
Well, anything else, Bill, that we didn't quite? I think we got most of it. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to it.
No, I mean, every November and the song comes on, and now that Gordon Lightfoot's passed away, I think that's another way to think about something that's important in our Canadian history.
Yeah, again, Gordon Lightfoot being a very, as you said, very popular historical figure. So thank you, Bill, for joining me. As always, you can find more episodes of Backroads Bill on Wednesday in audio form on all the popular podcast players, including Apple, Google, and Spotify. And if you want to watch the video version, you can head on over to NorthBayEcho.ca. And while you're there, you can also see all the other local North Bay podcasts that are both produced by Echo, like To North Bay with Love, or other local creators like Small Town Times and The Frontline. So, Bill, before we leave, any last words you want to give us?
Well, it's a usual salutation of happy trails and fair waters.